Nobody in that room was paying attention to the boy clearing glasses near the back wall. That was the point. That was always the point. He was tall and quiet and wore a borrowed vest 2 sizes too large, and he moved through the crowd the way water moves through a room it knows well. Nobody looked at him. Nobody spoke to him. He refilled a champagne flute here, straightened a napkin there, and carried a tray that kept his hands occupied and his presence invisible. The tray was the costume. The invisibility was the job. But when Blake Whitfield raised his glass and said what he said about the girl sitting alone near the piano, the boy in the borrowed vest set his tray down on the nearest table. He folded his white serving gloves, placed them on the tray, and then his fingers, before he even moved, tapped 3 soft notes against the surface of the table. Not on purpose. The way breathing is not on purpose. Nobody heard it. That would change. His name was Caleb Osei. He was 18 years old, an orphan from Street Jerome's Home for Boys, and the only scholarship student in Alderton Preparatory Academy's senior class. 5 months earlier, a county van had dropped him at the school's iron gate with 1 duffel bag and a composition notebook so old the cover had worn down to the cardboard underneath. The notebook had belonged to his father. Thomas Osei had been a musician. Not famous in the way that gets your name on buildings, but known in the way that matters more, known by the people he had actually helped. He had grown up in a small city in Ohio, the son of a Ghanaian immigrant father and an American mother who played church organ every Sunday and believed that music was not a gift but a responsibility. Thomas had studied at a conservatory on a full scholarship, graduated with honors, and then done the thing that confused everyone who had expected a career of recital halls and recordings. He went back to the places that needed him. For 30 years, Thomas Osei had composed, taught, and performed in communities that never had a music school, never had a concert hall, never had anyone who thought music was something their children deserved. He drove a van with a portable keyboard in the back and showed up at community centers and after-school programs, and sometimes just on stoops in neighborhoods where nobody had asked him to come. He charged nothing. He took nothing home except what he'd already brought with him. He died of a stroke at 44. Caleb was 13. The inheritance was the notebook. 312 pages of Thomas's handwriting, compositions and teaching notes and letters to students he had worked with over the years. Ideas he had not finished. Ideas he had. He had beautiful handwriting. Caleb had studied it so long he could reproduce it from memory. Caleb's mother, Adie's, had been a music teacher in the city school system. Small salary, large patience, the kind of person whose students wrote her letters 15 years later. After Thomas died, she sat down with Caleb at the upright piano in their apartment the following week and said, "We are going to learn everything your father knew. 3 hours every night." She was not asking. They did it for 5 years. She taught him posture and theory and technique, but what she really taught him was how to listen. "Your father said music is not for the person playing," she told him once. "It is for the person who needed something, said that they could not say themselves. Play to that person. Always." She died of cancer 2 weeks after his 17th birthday. By then, the notebook was finished. He had learned every page. At Alderton, his mornings started at 4:45. He set the dining hall before sunrise, arranging silverware in the pattern the senior staff had shown him on day 1. Salad fork outside, dinner fork inside, tines aligned, because the boys whose parents had donated the new library wing expected a certain standard, and the scholarship student who set their tables would meet it without being reminded. He refilled water pitchers at breakfast without being asked. He polished serving trays between classes in a utility room on the ground floor, standing over a narrow sink with a cloth that left no streaks. He washed dishes after every meal until the kitchen supervisor said the kitchen was clean. He spoke quietly. He kept to himself. He had a room on the 3rd floor of the scholarship dormitory, a narrow space with a single window that faced the adjacent building's wall, which meant the light came in gray in the morning and gray in the evening and was absent at night. He had put nothing on the walls. He kept his duffel bag under the bed, still packed the way it had been when he arrived, the habit of a person who does not fully trust that any place is permanent. The other boys called him the help, sometimes more specific variations of that, and moved past him in hallways, the way people move past furniture, adjusting their path without registering what they had adjusted for. They were not, most of them, cruel in any way they would have recognized as cruelty. They were simply not paying attention. He had learned, over years, to understand the difference. Not paying attention had its own weight. It was not the same as hatred. It was, in some ways, worse. He did not complain. He did not ask for anything. Every night before he turned off the light, he opened the notebook to one page and read it. His father's handwriting, careful and slightly slanted, blue ink in the early pages and black ink in the later ones, when Thomas had switched pens and never switched back. He read one page per night, slowly, sometimes playing through the music in his head while he read, sometimes just reading the words. He wore a small silver locket his mother had given him, an oval with a photograph inside of his parents on their wedding day. Thomas in a white suit, a daisy laughing at something off to the left of the camera, the kind of laugh that takes over a person's whole face. He touched it once each night. "Good night, Mama." There was one other person at Alderton who knew what Caleb carried. Nadia Cole had taught music theory on the second floor of the Arts Building for 9 years. She had heard a great many talented students in that time, the usual prep school prodigies who played Chopin at recitals and listed piano on college applications alongside lacrosse and community service. She knew the difference between a student who practiced and a student who understood. She had found out about Caleb by accident on a Thursday night in October when she went back to the Arts Building for her forgotten jacket. She heard the piano from the hallway. The piece was unfamiliar, structured but deeply personal, not written for a recital, written for a specific feeling that most composers never reached. She stood in the hallway for 43 minutes and did not move. The next morning she checked which practice room key had been borrowed. She did not report it. The following week she left the key in a slightly different position on the rack, close enough to where it belonged that it could have been anyone. She never mentioned it to Caleb. He never mentioned it to her. But on the morning of January 11th, when Caleb was heading to the van for the contracted serving job at the Hargrove Estate, Nadia stopped him in the corridor. She looked at him for a moment. "If there's ever a moment tonight, Caleb, don't hold back." He looked at her. He didn't answer. He walked to the van. The Hargrove Estate had been in the family for 4 generations. The ballroom on the east wing had 3 crystal chandeliers and limestone floors, and a Steinway Model D concert grand in the far corner that had not been played at a social event in 11 years. Claire Hargrove had been a pianist before she married Grant, and some things you keep even when you stop using them. The party was for Iris. She was turning 18, and she was sitting beside the Steinway in a green dress her mother had chosen because green had always been her color. Before the accident, before 22 months of specialists and setbacks, and the particular silence of a person who has given up expecting things to change, 2 years before that January night, Iris Hargrove had been one of the most promising young pianists in the region. Regional competition titles, conservatory callbacks, a teacher who had told her parents, quietly, that Iris had the thing that cannot be taught, the thing that separates a very good technician from someone who makes people put down what they are doing and listen. She had worked for it the way real musicians work, 6 hours a day, 7 days a week, the kind of commitment that becomes its own kind of identity. She had known since she was 11 that this was what she was. Then, on a Tuesday evening in March, a car ran a red light. She had been in the passenger seat. The impact was on her side. The median nerve in her right hand was partially compressed where it ran beneath the carpal ligament, and no surgery fully resolved it. What remained was a tremor in her 3 middle fingers, unpredictable, worsening under stress, making precision impossible. 3 different neurologists told her the same thing in 3 different offices with different diplomas on the walls behind them. She might recover some function over time. At the level she had been before, she would not play again. She was 16. She put the key cover down over the piano keys in her room the day she came home from the 3rd appointment. She had not lifted it since. Grant Hargrove had spent the 22 months that followed trying to reverse what 3 doctors had agreed on. $4.7 million in adaptive technology, 2 international treatment programs, a specialist in Berlin who had shown early promise and then reached the same conclusion as everyone else. He had done it the way a man does when he does not accept that problems exist, which cannot be solved with sufficient resources and determination. He was not wrong to try, but by January, the trying had become its own kind of wall between him and his daughter. Claire had proposed the party. 320 guests, the catering staff, the chandeliers at full, just one evening, to remind the world Iris was still here. Iris had agreed because her mother cried when she asked. She had not agreed because she expected anything to be different. She had agreed because Claire needed it to be possible, and because somewhere beneath the silence of the past 22 months, underneath the cover she had put down over the keys, a part of her still wanted, quietly and without permission, to be wrong about everything she had decided. She did not know that the boy who would prove her wrong was at that moment boarding a van in a borrowed vest with his father's music folded into the inside pocket of his jacket. The ballroom filled at 7. Iris sat beside the Steinway, not at the piano. Beside it, the way you sit beside something that used to belong to you and now just reminds you. She held a glass of sparkling water she hadn't drunk and watched the room the way a person watches a thing they have decided not to be part of. The refusals started at 7:40. Claire moved through the crowd with a brightness that was costing her something. Anyone paying attention could see the effort it required. She had spent 2 hours that afternoon helping Iris get ready, choosing the green dress, arranging her hair, telling her she looked like herself again. She had meant it. She was also afraid. The first boy was named Elliot. He was polite in the way of someone whose parents had invested in his social manner. "So sorry, Mrs. Hargrove." He had already promised this dance to someone. He found that someone in 30 seconds on the far side of the room. He did not look back once. Claire watched him go. The second said he had a wrist injury from lacrosse. Terrible timing. He danced the very next song with no visible difficulty, his arms moving perfectly. And Claire stood near the drinks table and watched him, and kept her face neutral. She had become accomplished at keeping her face neutral over the past 22 months. It was a skill she had not asked to develop. The third was the one that was hardest to process. He had turned away mid-sentence, smoothly, naturally, like a door closing in a light draft, and it was so unhurried that Claire stood there for a genuine moment, unable to determine whether she had been dismissed or whether something had simply and innocuously concluded. It had not concluded innocuously. She understood this when she watched him move easily into another conversation 20 feet away and laugh at something someone said, entirely at ease. Not a man with a wrist injury or a prior commitment, just a man who had decided. The fourth said, "Next song, Mrs. Hargrove, absolutely, I promise." He was gifted at finding reasons, across the following 40 minutes, to be elsewhere, occupied, already spoken for. He never broke any rule. He never said anything unkind. He was simply, consistently, unavailable. By then the whispers had started, not loud. Nothing anyone would recall specifically when they told people what had happened at the Hargrove party. Just the low continuous frequency of 300 people choosing to look away from the same thing simultaneously. A woman at table 7 said to her husband quietly, don't look, it will only make it worse." A girl Iris had coached through a difficult audition piece the previous spring held her napkin close to her mouth. The two governors at table 1 found something engrossing to discuss with each other. 320 people, and not one of them stood up. Iris stared at the green silk over her knees and counted her breaths. 1, 2, 3. She had learned this in the early months after the accident. A physical way of staying present in a body that kept reminding her of things she had decided to stop feeling. She had gotten very good at it. "Just one evening, sweetheart." Her mother's voice from that afternoon still running. Then Blake Whitfield walked in. He was 40 minutes late, on purpose, the way some people are late on purpose, so the room has filled enough to notice an entrance. He wore a tuxedo that had been made for him specifically, and carried himself with the ease of someone who has never once wondered whether they belonged in a room. He had dated Iris for 7 months before the accident. He had visited her twice in the rehabilitation center, once with flowers, once without. Then his friends had started making comments, and his father had said, once, in the car, that a Whitfield didn't build his future around someone else's limitation. Blake had not gone back after that. He had told himself a great many things about why. He came through the entrance, found Iris immediately, and stopped to collect a drink from a passing tray. Preston Vale was waiting at the bar. Preston had a talent for finding the sharpest available thing in any room and placing it in someone else's hand. He leaned close to Blake and said something. Blake's mouth curved. Blake raised his glass. He didn't shout, he didn't need to. He pitched it to Carrie, the way a person does when they have calculated exactly how loud to be. "You know what's sad about this whole setup?" He tilted his glass toward the corner. "She's sitting next to the one thing she used to be good at and she can't even touch it anymore." A pause, for timing. Broken hand, broken future. "At least the piano still works." The laugh from Preston came first, then 2 more from the group nearby. Then it spread, guilty and uneven, the way laughter moves through a crowd that knows better and doesn't stop itself. Iris did not move. Her right hand, resting in her lap, curled very slightly. The 3 middle fingers trembled once. The involuntary confirmation that had followed her out of every doctor's office and into every room for 22 months. She did not look up. Grant Hargrove rose halfway from his chair at table 1. Claire's hand on his arm. He sat back down. The glass stem bent slightly in his grip. Coach Raymond Ellis, standing near the service entrance, felt his jaw lock. He had been at Alderton for 11 years. He had watched a great many things happen in rooms like this one. He knew, most of the time, when to step in and when to wait. He looked across the room. Caleb had already set down the tray. Ellis watched him fold the serving gloves, watched him place them on the silver surface, careful, exact, like a man putting down something he was finished with. Caleb looked up. Their eyes met across the room. Ellis nodded once. Go. For a moment, Caleb didn't move. He stood with his hands at his sides and looked across the room at the girl in the green dress and the piano beside her that nobody had touched all evening. He thought about his mother's instruction, the one she had repeated so many times it had become something closer to a law. Play when someone needs it, not when someone is watching. He thought about the fact that 300 people were, at this exact moment, watching. He thought about the fact that he was the serving staff, that he was 18, that he had a scholarship that required him to be invisible, and that what he was about to do was the opposite of invisible. He thought about all of it. Then he thought about the look on Iris's face when Blake's words reached her. The way she had looked down at her right hand, not with anger, not with tears, but with the specific expression of a person receiving a confirmation of something they had already decided to believe about themselves. He picked up the tray, set it back down, picked up the gloves, folded them, set them on the silver surface. Caleb walked across the ballroom. He didn't hurry. He walked the way a person walks when they have decided something and don't need anyone's agreement. Preston saw him coming and nudged Blake. Look, the help is doing something. Blake turned. Hey, the kitchen doesn't need you out here. Caleb walked past both of them without adjusting his course. Not arrogance, simply the movement of a person who has already decided that what was behind him was not where he was going. He reached Iris. He knelt to her eye level, the way his mother had taught him when he was small, not bowed, not stooped, but level, because a person sitting deserves to be spoken to at their own height. My name is Caleb. I work in the kitchen at Alderton. He paused. I'm sorry about what he said, all of it. Iris looked at him. Her expression was closed, careful, practiced, the face of someone who had learned to treat reactions as a vulnerability. You don't need to do this. I know. His eyes moved, briefly, to her right hand in her lap. I know what the doctors told you about your hand. Median nerve. The tremor in the 3 middle fingers. 3 specialists, who all said the same thing. She went still. My father spent 30 years working with musicians who had been told exactly that. He didn't believe it was the end. Not once. Caleb glanced at the Steinway. He wrote something for them. For the ones who were told they were finished and weren't. A pause. I'd like to play it, if you'll let me. Iris looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the piano. She looked back. She didn't say yes. But she didn't say no. Caleb stood up and walked to the Steinway. Okay, stop. I need you to hold this image for a second. 320 people in that room. Governors. A retired federal judge. Surgeons who had operated on heads of state. Everyone in that room had money and standing and the practiced confidence that comes from decades of both. Not a single one of them had done anything in the past 40 minutes except watch. The boy who had been clearing their glasses was about to sit down at a concert grand piano at a private party. Uninvited, unannounced, and play. He sat down. He didn't adjust the bench. He didn't look at the room. He lifted the key cover with the specific quiet of someone who has done this 10,000 times, set it back, and placed his hands. 3 notes. The same 3 he had tapped on the table without thinking, earlier in the evening. A soft opening phrase, barely above a breath, and then the piece opened beneath his hands like a room being entered for the first time. The contracted orchestra stopped mid-phrase. Victor Ashby, the conductor, lowered his baton. He was 53 years old, had conducted in 14 countries, had heard thousands of pianists across 4 decades. What was coming from the Steinway in the corner was not a talented student performing at a party. He set his baton on the music stand and turned to face the piano. The piece was Thomas Osei's, written in 1998 for a student named Maria, a young woman who had lost significant use of her right hand in an accident and told Thomas she would never play again. Thomas had not agreed. He spent 6 weeks designing a composition specifically for her situation. The left hand carried the entire architecture of the music, melody, harmony, counterpoint, completely. The right hand needed only 3 notes, a held chord placed at intervals, simple enough that even a tremoring hand could place it. The tremor didn't have to disappear. The music was built to hold it. He had titled it, in his handwriting at the top of the notebook page, For the Left Hand and What the Right Hand Remembers. Caleb played it the way he had learned it. Not from printed sheet music, but from memory, from years of his mother's hands beside his on the keys, from 5 years of 3 hours every night, from the hours alone in the locked practice room at Alderton, at 2 in the morning when the building was empty, and no one was listening, except the dark. He played it the way his mother had taught him every piece worth playing, not to show what he could do, to say something that needed saying to the person who needed to hear it. The room went quiet by degrees. Table 7 first. The woman who had told her husband not to look, she stopped mid-sentence and didn't finish it. Then the table beside her. Then the governor's. Then the group at the bar, including Preston Vale, who had stopped laughing entirely and was standing with a drink in his hand that he had forgotten he was holding. 300 people going quiet one at a time, the way a field goes quiet before something arrives. Blake Whitfield had not moved from his position near the bar. He did not speak. He did not know what to do with his face, and for the first time that evening, he was not performing his face for anyone. He was just standing there, holding his glass, watching something he did not have a name for. Madame Sylvia Renard was at table 2. She was 77 years old and had spent 5 decades as one of the most respected figures in classical music education in the country. Pianists she had trained performed at Carnegie Hall, the Royal Albert Hall, the Musikverein in Vienna. She knew, with the specific confidence of someone who has spent a lifetime developing a single skill of judgment, the difference between a student who had mastered technique and a musician in the full meaning of the word. She had encountered perhaps 9 of the latter in 50 years of teaching. She had stopped expecting to encounter another one. Her last truly extraordinary student had retired 11 years ago, and the gap between that student and what she had heard since had taught her, finally, to adjust her expectations. She had come to the party because Claire Hargrove was an old friend, and January evenings were long. When the first phrase reached her, she set her glass down. Something was familiar. The architecture of it, the specific way the left hand was carrying both melodic line and harmonic support simultaneously. A technique that required not just skill but a particular kind of musical intelligence, a composer's instincts in a performer's hands. It was reminding her of something she could not immediately place. She leaned forward in her chair. On the second phrase, she placed it. Thomas Osei. This was Thomas Osei's structural language. She had heard him play once, in 1997, at a small venue in Chicago, and had spent the following 2 decades telling anyone who would listen that the world had failed to understand what it had. She recognized it the way you recognize the handwriting of someone you loved. She stood up. Her knees informed her, as they always did now, that this was inadvisable. She stood anyway and began moving toward the piano, not quickly but directly, with the singular focus of a woman who has identified something and is not going to observe it from across the room. By the time Caleb reached the middle section, the ballroom was completely silent. Not the polite silence of an audience waiting for a performance to end so they can applaud and return to their conversations. The other silence, the one that settles over a room when something is occurring that the people in it know, without being able to articulate why, they will still remember with perfect clarity when they are very old, and the things they thought important have become difficult to recall. Iris had not moved. She was still in the chair beside the piano, and she was watching Caleb's hands. His left hand moving with a certainty that went past skill, past even mastery, the certainty of someone for whom music was not a thing they had learned but a thing they had always been. His right hand placed simply. 3 notes. Held, released, unhurried, present. Her own right hand, in her lap, shifted slightly, not toward the keys, just shifted. She recognized something, not the piece itself. She had never heard this piece, but its structure. The way it was built so that imperfection was not an obstacle to it but woven into it, designed for, accounted for. The way the music made room for what you had instead of requiring what you had lost. Caleb slowed the tempo by a fraction of a beat, the musical equivalent of a door opening and someone stepping aside. He stopped. Not because the piece had ended, because the piece was waiting. He turned to Iris. "This is the part you can play," he said. She looked at him. "My hand, 3 notes. That is all this section requires. Your father's money and every specialist he hired told you the tremor was the problem. This piece was written so the tremor is not a problem." A pause. "It was written so the tremor is just part of the music." She looked at the keys, the bench beside him. Her right hand. "I'll ruin it," she said. "You can't. My father made certain of that when he wrote it. The music holds you, not the other way around." Grant Hargrove stood. "Don't push her. Not loud, but carrying." Sylvia Renard turned toward him. The look of a woman who has spent 50 years watching people get in the way of something important and has no patience left for it. "Are you protecting your daughter right now, Grant? Or are you protecting yourself from watching her try in front of 300 people?" Grant opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Iris looked at her father, at Caleb, at the keys. She stood up. 22 months. Let that settle for a second. 22 months of that hand reminding her every single day of what she had been told she'd lost. Of covers kept down. Of a part of herself she had agreed to call finished, because it was easier to agree than to keep hoping for something that 3 different people with degrees on their walls had told her was gone. And she stood up. She walked to the bench and sat down beside him, not with confidence, with the particular quality of movement of someone doing something before their own fear catches up to them. She placed her left hand on the keys. Steady. She had always had control of her left hand. She placed her right hand. The 3 middle fingers trembled. The small, familiar tremor that had been with her every day for 22 months. The one that showed up worst when she was nervous or tired. The one she had named in her head, eventually, just so she could think about it as a thing instead of a sentence. She looked at her fingers. "Don't look at your hand," Caleb said. "Look at me." She looked at him. "Hear the rhythm first. Your hand has always known this. It knows it right now. Let your ear go ahead of everything else and your hand will follow. Don't try to control it. Just listen." He began again from the opening of the middle section. Slower than before, deliberate, each phrase with space around it, giving her time that was not rushing her. Iris placed her right hand. First chord. 3 notes, slightly uneven, the tremor visible in the slight variation in how long each note held, but placed, there, in the music. Second chord. Less uneven. Third chord. And something shifted. Not in her hand, but in her attention, because her ear had found the rhythm and was pulling her into it, and her hand was following the ear without her having to manage every individual finger. The left hand surrounding the music, carrying it, and her right hand placing 3 notes at the right moment, and the piece absorbing them the way it had been designed to, needing them, making room for exactly what she had. 4 measures, 8, 12. Caleb's left hand wove around hers the way a current moves around something fixed, not fighting it, building with it, finding its shape and using it. She stopped looking at her hand. She was looking at the keys, and she was playing, and the expression on her face was not triumph and not relief, but something older and quieter than either of those things. The look of a person who had been told that a specific door was permanently locked and had just found out that it had been open this whole time and nobody had been close enough to check. The piece climbed toward its resolution. Caleb's left hand rose into the final passage, the long ascending phrase Thomas had written to close it, and Iris placed the final chord. 3 notes, held. The last sound faded up into the chandeliers and was gone. Silence. Iris looked at her right hand, still resting on the keys. The 3 middle fingers, still with the tremor. Still not what they had been before. A car ran a red light on a Tuesday evening in March. "I just played," she said. Not to Caleb, not to the room, not to her mother, who was already moving toward the piano from table 1, with tears she wasn't trying to hide. Just out loud, a fact she was confirming against the air. Caleb looked at her. "You never stopped being a musician. They just convinced you to believe that you had." That was the sentence. The one that walked out of that room with every person who heard it and did not come back out. The first person to applaud was Victor Ashby, who had moved to the side of the Steinway at some point during the duet, and he brought his hands together once, then again, and the sound broke something that had been held too tightly in the room all evening. Sylvia Renard joined him. Then the room. Real talk. I have told a lot of stories. I have never stopped to say this is the part where something shifts. Not because I wanted to, because something actually did. 300 people who had been sitting in their seats while cruelty moved through the room, and then 3 minutes of music, and now they were on their feet. Not because the music fixed what Blake had done, because it made visible what had always been true, and what all of them had chosen not to see. Grant Hargrove stood at his table, one hand pressed over his mouth, and did not try to look like a man who was not undone. Claire reached Iris before anyone else. She put both arms around her daughter and held on without saying anything, which was exactly right. At the bar, Blake stood with his glass, alone. Preston had moved 2 tables over at some point during the music. Nobody at the bar was with Blake. Nobody at any table near him was looking at him. Senator Whitfield had turned his chair away. Grant crossed the room to Caleb, who had moved back from the piano and was standing near the wall, slightly apart from everything, the way he stood everywhere. Grant stopped in front of him. He was the CEO of a company with operations on 4 continents. He had been in rooms with heads of state. He had made decisions that affected thousands of people, and had learned a long time ago how to hold himself in any situation. He looked at an 18-year-old boy in a borrowed vest and did not know what to say. "Thomas Osei's son has been at my daughter's school for 5 months," he finally said. "And I didn't know." Caleb waited. "I spent $4.7 million trying to find what you had in a notebook," Grant said. His voice was quieter than he usually kept it. "That says something about what I've been paying attention to." He extended his hand. "I'd like to change that. Starting now, if you'll let me." Caleb looked at the hand. He thought of his mother, who had told him, "People will offer you things when they finally see you. Let them. That is how debts get paid and how houses get built." He shook Grant's hand. Sylvia reached them. She took a card from inside her jacket, heavy cream stock, and pressed it into Caleb's other hand. "I'm going to call the admissions office on Monday morning," she said. "And I'm going to say the same thing I said about my last great student, 26 years ago." She held his eyes. "Don't make me wait long." That night, after the guests had gone and the catering staff was packing up, Grant stood alone at the Steinway. He lifted the key cover, the one Claire had put down years ago and not touched. He pressed a single key and let it ring out into the empty room. Then he took out his phone and called his foundation director. "I need you to look up Thomas Osei tonight," he said. "I'll explain everything in the morning." 6 weeks later, Grant announced the Thomas Osei Music Foundation, $38 million over 10 years. Full scholarships for students with musical ability from families without resources, and a dedicated program for musicians recovering from injury or disability. The inaugural class, 12 students, from schools that had no music programs at all. Caleb was named the first ambassador. Preston Vale attended no more events of consequence, and was not much spoken of afterward. Blake Whitfield's father lost his Senate seat in November by 19 points. The senator's concession speech did not mention his son. The university Blake had been accepted to rescinded its offer within 96 hours of a video circulating, filmed by a guest at Table 7, that showed what Blake had said, and then showed what happened next. The contrast did what contrast does when it is absolute. Nadia Cole was standing at the entrance of the arts building when Caleb came back the next morning. She had been there since before the van arrived. She looked at him the way a teacher looks when she already knows the answer and is giving the student time to arrive at it. He reached into his pocket and held out the practice room key. She looked at it for a moment. Then she shook her head. "Keep it. You still need it." She paused. "Your father would have kept it too." Caleb put it back in his pocket. He went inside. That afternoon, after his shift, he went to the practice room and played for 2 hours. Not the piece for Iris. Something new. A first page, unsure of itself, trying to find what it was trying to say. His father had always said that was where everything began. 22 months later, Iris Hargrove performed in public for the first time since the accident, not at a competition. At the inaugural benefit concert for the Thomas Osei Music Foundation, before 400 people who had paid for the privilege of being in the room, she played the piece. She had practiced it for 3 months, not the way she had practiced before the accident, 6 hours a day chasing perfection, but the way Caleb had taught her, listening first, letting the ear lead. Some days her right hand cooperated more than others. She had stopped tracking which days were which. At the end of the final passage, her right hand had the tremor. The same tremor it had always had, since a Tuesday evening in March when a car didn't stop. She didn't stop. She played through it and let the last chord ring until it finished by itself, on its own time. Caleb sat in the audience with Sylvia beside him. Neither of them spoke during the performance. Sylvia had brought her handkerchief and used it twice. When Iris stood to bow, she didn't hide her right hand. She stood with it at her side, fingers slightly curled, the tremor present and visible, part of her, the way a scar is part of a person. She bowed with it the way a person bows with a scar. This happened. It is still here. It is not the final word. The audience stayed on their feet for a long time. After the concert, she found Caleb in the lobby. She had the composition notebook under her arm, the one she had borrowed from him 3 months earlier to learn the piece. The cover was worn down to cardboard. She had handled it carefully, the way you handle something that belongs to someone else. She turned to the title page. For the left hand, and what the right hand remembers. Thomas Osei, 1998. Underneath, in her handwriting, she had added one line, played by Iris Hargrove, both hands. She handed the notebook back. Caleb looked at what she had written. He ran his thumb across the line, once, slowly. He closed the notebook and held it against his chest for a moment. Then he put it in his bag, carefully, the way it had always been carried. There is a thing Caleb's mother told him the night before she died. He has never said it publicly. He told it to Nadia Cole once, at the end of a long conversation, and Nadia has kept it as carefully as anything she has ever been trusted with. As Osei said, "The music is not yours to keep, it is yours to give. Play when someone needs it, not when someone is watching." That is a harder instruction than it sounds. Most of us wait. We wait until we are certain it will go well, until someone asks, until the room is the right size and the timing is right and the outcome feels probable. We hold what we have close because what we have feels fragile, and the rooms we carry it into are sometimes unkind, and we have been told, by enough people and enough experience, that visibility is a risk. Caleb had been told that too. He had been called the help and the ghost, and worse. He had been scheduled into invisibility for 5 months, at a school where his scholarship required him to be useful, and his presence required him to be small. He had every reason to keep the vest on, pick up the tray, stay near the wall. He set down the tray. He folded the gloves. He walked 40 feet across a room where nobody had asked him to do anything except stay out of the way. And he played. 320 people in that ballroom were educated, accomplished, and capable of kindness in all the ways that don't require anything. Every single one of them stayed in their seats when kindness cost something. Except the boy they had been looking past all evening. Every room has a Caleb, someone moving through the edges with something extraordinary that nobody has thought to ask about, because nobody has thought to look. And every room has a moment, when the music stops and the silence goes wrong and someone needs to decide whether their gift belongs to them or to the person in front of them who needs it most. He made his choice in the time it takes to fold a pair of gloves. If this story stayed with you, leave a like so more people find it. If you have ever been Iris, if someone told you the thing you were is finished, drop it in the comments. Those stories deserve to be heard. I'll see you in the next one.